Yes, sir.
Okay. So in yesterday's class, we learned the first few steps of manufacture of concrete. So batching, mixing, transportation, and then placing. So today we learn what we do once the concrete has been placed in the site. Okay. So I think most of you all are aware of this process, but you probably don't know what it is called or why we do it. So curing essentially is a process in which we ensure there is the sufficient and necessary condition for cement to hydrate properly so that the concrete can gain its strength that is desired by us. Okay. So the most common way of curing is simply by pouring water on concrete, or placing wet clothes or wet gunny bags, etc., on concrete to ensure that there is enough moisture at all times. Although this might be the widely accepted and more commonly followed methods, they might not really be the most effective. So cost effective maybe, effective in terms of rate of strength gain, probably not. Okay, so we'll take a look at what few conventional methods are, what few non-conventional methods are, where which method can be adopted. Okay, so we'll do that today. We'll start with curing and then we'll move on to a concept called as workability. So curing, like I said, it is the process of maintaining a satisfactory moisture content and temperature. So all the necessary conditions for effective hydration to take place. Okay, and what happens when hydration happens? At the end of hydration, CSA gel is formed, and CSA gel ultimately leads to your strength of concrete. Okay, and more the volume of the strength, less is the volume of pores. Less is the volume of pores, more dense the material is going to be. Okay, more durable the material is going to be, more hard the material is going to be. So curing is very important. Next. So one thing you could ask me is, sir, for how long should we cure concrete? Okay, under laboratory conditions, if you remember, when we did the strength test on cement experiment, I said demold the cement mortar cube after 1 day and place it inside water for 28 days. Okay, because we know at the end of 28 days, 99% of hydration is completed. So ideally, you should be curing all concrete related structures and materials, etc., for 28 days, because hydration is a continuous process that will happen for 28 days. Under laboratory conditions, it is fine, because you only have a cube or a beam or whatever, you can demold it, go and put it inside a tank that has water. But what do you do with something like, say, a building, something like, say, a manhole, something that is huge, that will not fit into a tank? You can't build a huge house, take the house and put it inside, sea or a lake or whatever, because the house is fixed to the ground. It is a huge structure. So in such cases, curing them for a duration of 28 days becomes impossible, okay, uneconomical, and to a large extent also unnecessary. So as an industry accepted standard, we cure all major infrastructure and concrete made structures for at least a duration of 7 days. Okay, some contractors, to be on the safer side, they do it for at least 14 days. So 7 is minimum, 14 is good enough. Anything beyond 14, if you do, no harm. It will obviously add to the strength of the structure. Even if you don't do, the loss of strength is not going to be that much. Okay, because at the end of 7 days, the concrete has gained about 67% strength. Okay, so anything beyond that, the curve sort of flattens. The rate of strength gain actually smoothens. So the first 7 days is very, very important. Keep this in mind. Next. Yeah. So why do we have to ensure sufficient moisture is there? One, it can be for a lot of reasons. It can be the temperature there. It can be the wind speed there. It can be the humidity there. So the water that you've added inside the concrete mix can get evaporated. Okay, can get lost, can get carried away by the wind. So if this water that we've added in the mix is lost, there is not sufficient water for hydration. So we have to supply this water continuously. So that is one reason. The second is, although higher temperatures sort of accelerates the process of hydration by itself, we learn at a later point that there's something called as steam curing, where we cure concrete using very high temperature steam. So high temperature, no doubt, increases the rate of hydration. But since the temperature increases, you also notice that what happens to water at high temperature, the water will evaporate. Okay. So you can't really simply cure concrete by increasing the temperature. You can cure concrete by increasing the temperature whilst maintaining a moist environment there. Say something like steam. So water is a necessity along with heat. Okay. So like I said, why is it important? If you don't cure it properly, the strength of concrete drastically reduces by up to 50%. Okay. This is another thing. See, we live in Bangalore. So for us, temperature and temperature fluctuations is not that much of an issue. Okay. Whereas if you go to areas where it's too hot, okay, as soon as you place concrete, the water gets lost. So there you will sort of have to start the process of curing immediately after the initial and final setting time is over. On the other hand, if the temperature is too cold, the process there is going to be difficult again, because the water that you've added into the mix, there is the problem of it freezing. Okay, and once the water freezes, it is not physically available to take part in that chemical reaction with cement and for the hydration process to happen. So in hot weather conditions, we use cold water or ice cubes in the concrete mix, whereas in cold weather concreting, we actually use hot water. Okay, so just keep this in mind. Next, like I said, more CSS gel form, better is the density, more is the durability. Okay, and lesser is the percentage of voids that is present, the less porous the structure is going to be. Or the other word is, it is going to be more watertight. It will not let water to seep through it or percolate through it. Next, the last point I've already mentioned. So curing is basically ensuring cement does what it is supposed to do and concrete can become what it is capable of becoming. Next. One second. Okay, let us move on to the different ways in which curing can be done. So the most common method, like I told you, is water curing. One second, my system crashed. I'll get back to you guys. So sorry for the inconvenience. I don't know what is happening today. Where were we? The different ways in which curing can be done. Okay, so the most common method, like I told you, is water curing. In water curing, we basically ensure that there's enough water or a layer of water that is present on concrete, so that this temperature can be maintained and water is present. Okay, and you should also know this: the water that is applied is only applied on the exposed surface that is exposed to the environment. In case it is a hollow surface, we don't necessarily fill it inside or whatever. Or if it is within the formwork, we don't pour water in between the gap between the formwork and concrete. Okay, so you only apply water or make water stand where the possibility of water to leak out of or evaporate out of is there. Other places, curing is not really important. So the different ways in which you can supply water is by immersion. Immersion is like I told you, whatever we do in our lab. We demold the cube or the beam or whatever, take it and put it inside a curing tank. Put it inside the curing tank. So that is immersion. Next is ponding. Ponding is this image that is there on the screen right now. That is ponding. So basically, you use clay or mud and build a temporary bund sort of a thing on the edges of your concrete structure, and make a freestanding water there. Okay, now you create an artificial pond with the help of that. So that is ponding. Next is by spraying and fogging is you use these pipes or these nozzles that can spray out water. Okay, this spraying and fogging is normally done for vertical structures, like say columns, pillars, all these metro pillars that you have. You can't really do ponding on that or immersion on that because it is vertical in nature. So in such cases, you do spraying and fogging. And the last one is obviously the most common thing that we all know, a wet covering. You take a cloth material that can retain water for an extended period of time, dip it in water, and spread it on the concrete surface. And that cloth will remain there forever. You just have to keep pouring water over it so that it can remain wet. Okay. If you also notice these days on these white topping roads that happen, they also do the wet covering thing. So if you've traveled on all these roads, the roads are covered with gunny bags, and if these authorities don't remove it after the stipulated time, the vehicles obviously get restless and the drivers sort of drive over it. So that is wet covering. Okay, so the next method is heat curing. So when I say heat curing, do not think I simply supply heat. Okay, because like I told you, heat, your hydration process that is there, sort of speeds up when the temperature rises, but it is a two-sided coin sort of a thing. So the hydration process not only speeds, but hydration also requires water. But if the temperature increases, the water evaporates. Okay, so when you're increasing the temperature by the form of heat or whatever, should always ensure that there is sufficient water also. If not in the form of liquid water, at least in the form of steam. So when we talk about heat curing, it can be done in 4 ways. Okay, steam curing at ordinary pressure, steam curing at high pressure, curing using infrared radiation, and the last one is electrical curing. So I'll briefly explain each one of them. At ordinary temperature is when you don't have a sealed chamber. There is no airtight chamber where you can go do curing. So what you do is, this is mostly done for all these precast structures. So these metro girders and then railway line sleepers, okay, things that are precast in the factory. So what you do is you stack all these precast prefabricated structures and cover them using very thick polythene sheet or something that can retain steam inside it, and then you apply steam into it. Okay, so why is it at ordinary pressure? It is not sealed. You can't really increase the pressure. There will be some opening through which your steam can eventually escape. So this is steam curing at ordinary temperature, most suitable for precast prefabricated structures. So this is again, this just shows at a higher temperature how the rate of curing increases. And next is steam curing at high pressure. So here it has to be a closed chamber. So if you can see here, there is a huge steel drum. Okay, so this can again be used only for precast prefabricated structures up to a certain size. So if it is small enough to fit into this steel container, then you place it inside. Okay, then apply steam at high pressure. So doing it at high pressure is definitely advantageous than doing it at normal pressure. But this cannot be used for all the applications like in the previous case. There is this limitation of size of the member that you are trying to cure. Okay, the next one is by infrared radiation. So in a lot of cold countries, okay, where the temperature can go below sub-zero, using steam can also not be an option because it would rapidly cool. And so the other way of doing this is by using infrared radiation. Okay, so you apply infrared radiation, and that will eventually increase the temperature there, and that's how curing happens. The last one is by electrical curing. This is mostly limited to research purpose. It is not practically applicable. So what you do is you basically embed electrodes during the process of casting of concrete itself and pass AC current. So if you pass DC current, what will happen is the electrolysis might happen and the water that is present inside might break and the curing will not be effective. So you pass AC current, and because of this current that is flowing through the concrete, and concrete having its own dielectric properties, the temperature would tend to increase and the hydration would fasten. Okay, so this again is not widely used. One, because there's a lot of danger involved. Because as we know, concrete by itself is never used. We always use reinforced cement concrete. And it has also been observed that when you pass electricity through concrete, the reinforcement that we embed inside concrete can be subjected to accelerated corrosion. Okay, they tend to rust and corrode easily. So the last one is not to be widely used, especially if you have reinforcement within concrete. Okay, next. Okay, there are a few other methods that we've already spoken about. So these days you have curing agents as well. Okay, you get this hydrophobic spray sort of a material. As soon as final setting time is over, you come and spray a layer of this material on top of the concrete surface. It will create a thin film that will prevent the water from evaporating. Okay, so that can be done. Or you basically cover the surface of concrete with anything that will prevent evaporation of water. So these are all various methods of curing of concrete. Okay, and like I told you, your curing should happen for a minimum duration of at least 7 days. Next, moving on, we'll talk about two defects in concrete that can be observed, okay, before we actually talk about workability. So this is sort of directly related to your compaction process that we were talking about. So what happens if you don't properly compact concrete, or what if you've not done your mix design properly? So there are two things that can be observed. One is called segregation, the other is called bleeding. They both might seem similar. In fact, bleeding is a type of segregation, but there is a key difference. I'll tell you in what way. In segregation, what happens? Your aggregates and the rest of your cement paste separate. Okay, if you look at the images that is there on the screen, so look at the image on the right. There's a bunch of aggregates that is come separately, and there is no cement paste to bind them together. Okay, so what could have probably happened is you have aggregates that are very heavy, okay, or aggregates that have a higher specific gravity. So when you over compact it, obviously the heavier material will go to the bottom and the lighter material will come to the top. And so cement and water, having cement paste and water having comparatively lesser specific gravity will rise to the top, and these coarse aggregates tend to settle to the bottom. Okay, so this is a very common type of segregation that is observed. The second thing can be the paste is moving away from the coarse aggregate, meaning there is nothing wrong with the coarse aggregate, but the way you have mixed the cement paste, okay, maybe you have added too much cement and water, so the paste has become very runny, okay, or it has become very watery. So your paste is separating out of the coarse aggregates and moving away to the coming to the surface. The last one being the paste and the coarse aggregates are still there. Only the water will rise to the surface through means of capillary action. Okay, so this last case sort of comes into the terrain of bleeding. So, like I told you, segregation is whatever we've just discussed. The reasons for segregation would be improper mix design. Okay, improper compaction. When I say improper mix design, I told you, the mix design that you do, the ratio that you get in the end, 1:2:4 or whatever, has to be very scientific in nature. It has to be decided based on your packing density, based on the particle size distribution, to see if the curve shape is S or not. Okay, if you follow unscientific means, just add how much ever, whatever you want, they are not going to blend together properly. Okay, eventually they will fall apart even in the fresh state. So that is improper mix design. And the last thing is, I told you, when we are placing concrete, okay, if you impart a lot of mechanical energy while placing, like dumping it from a huge height, or these conveyor belts traveling at faster speed and dumping the concrete at one end from a great height or at a greater speed, the heavier materials will tend to get carried away due to the inertia that is there and separate from the rest of the mixture. So these are all reasons for segregation. And moving into the more specific case of segregation, that is bleeding, here what happens is just the water, okay, the water that is present in your fresh cement or your wet cement, there'll be these tiny capillary tubes that are found within this concrete matrix, and the water rises to the surface. Okay, this is something that is commonly observed in all construction practices. What happens is these masons or workers that are there, they tend to over compact concrete, and when they're trying to finish the top surface, they'll use a very smooth thing like a small metal plate or something and try to keep tapping the top surface. Okay, when you keep tapping the top surface, what happens? The water rises to the surface. To draw an analogy, next time if you go to a coastal area or say somewhere near a beach, even if you're standing a few feet away from the, wherever the water shore is, okay, if you keep jumping in the same place or keep tapping the sand in the same place over a repeated period of time, you'll observe that the water actually comes to the surface and the sand is going below. Okay, same logic is happening here. If you keep tapping the top surface or keep over compacting the top surface, the water that is inside, due to the nature of its specific gravity, it will come to the top. Okay, so this is bleeding, a very specific case of segregation where only water gets separated and comes to the surface. One can also argue that a little bit of bleeding, not a lot of bleeding, a little bit of bleeding is actually good for concrete. I'll tell you in what way. So for proper hydration of cement to happen, 28% by weight of cement is the amount of water that is required. Okay, but if we add only 28% by weight of cement as water, your mix is highly unworkable. Okay, it is very harsh. It becomes a very dry mix. So what we do is we tend to increase the water. So say we use water cement ratios like 0.45, 0.5. So in a way, we are actually adding more water than is required for the mix, simply to ensure that the concrete mix is workable. So when bleeding happens, some of this excess water might come to the surface. Okay, so some of this water escaping and coming to the surface is not a bad thing, because in a way you're removing the excess water that you've added into the mixture. At the same time, this top layer of water that is formed will ensure that the temperature is maintained for a certain time, and this evaporation loss that would have otherwise occurred from the surface, leading to cracks on the surface, is eliminated, because the water from the surface before the water from the surface can get evaluated, this thin layer of water that is there will get evaporated. Okay, so it sort of delays the evaporation and crack forming process that will happen. So a little bit of bleeding is always good. But if there is too much water, if it becomes too mirrory, literally as as shiny as if you can see a face on the surface of concrete, then there's something wrong. So I'll just skip through this because it's something that I just explained. So both segregation and bleeding basically leads to these problems. The strength of concrete is reduced. There'll be cracking on surface. And the bond between your cement paste and your aggregates is lost, again essentially reducing the strength of concrete. Okay, moving on to why segregation and bleeding occurs, we come on to some topic called as workability. Okay, I've already defined what workability is when we spoke about Abraham's law. Okay, where we defined, if you guys remember, we said the strength of concrete is inversely proportional to the water cement ratio, provided the concrete mix is workable. So what does workable mean? So workability is basically the ease with which, okay, or the amount of energy or the amount of compactive effort through using which you can handle concrete. When I say handle concrete, what do we do with concrete? We take it, mix it, place it in whatever. So this placing that happens should happen with a lot of ease. The compaction should happen with a lot of ease. I should not spend a lot of energy or mechanical vibration for this concrete to go and settle down and take its form or shape. Okay, so the lesser is the amount of energy that I have to spend for compacting, more is the workability of concrete. So what do you think are the various factors that affect the workability of concrete? So the first and foremost thing is obviously the amount of water that you add into the mixture. So if I want a concrete mix that is workable, can I keep adding how much of a water I want? No. You will have to draw a line at some point, because just now we learned about segregation and bleeding. You can't simply keep adding how much of a water you want because you want the concrete to be more workable. In fact, this is one mistake that a lot of unskilled laborers do at site. They would have mixed a lot of concrete at once, and they probably take a lunch break or whatever, and then they come back and a lot of concrete is unused. They pour water into the same concrete to make it more workable. These are all detrimental effects. These are all things that should not be practiced in site at all. Either you mix how much of a concrete is required and use it all at once, or ensure that whatever you mixed, even if it's a huge quantity, you finish your work and then take a break. Okay, so you should never keep adding water to make the concrete mix more and more workable. Your Abrams law will come into picture and the strength of concrete is lost. So, what are the various factors affecting workability? We'll sort of list them one by one. Yes, this is one thing I should have probably told you before also. So the wet concrete that is there in its fresh state, okay, as soon as you just mix, it is called plastic concrete because you know what plastic means. It can deform easily and it does not retain its original shape. Sometimes it is also called as green concrete. Okay, so fresh concrete is green concrete. So these are the various factors affecting workability. Starting with the first one, like I said, your water content to water cement ratio, the most obvious parameter. Okay, you cannot keep increasing water how much ever you want. However, what you can do is maintain a constant water cement ratio. Meaning, if I'm using water content of say 180 kgs per meter cube, and if I'm using a water cement ratio of say 0.5. Okay, I'm basically using 360 kgs of cement with 180 kgs of water, which is fine. But if I want my mix to be slightly more workable, I can, if I'm increasing the water content, say if I'm increasing the water content from 180 kgs to 200 kgs, what I can do is I can maintain the same water cement ratio. Look at the last point here. So a corresponding cement content can also be added to maintain the same water cement ratio. So if I'm using 200 kgs of water, whilst maintaining the same water cement ratio of 0.5, I have to use 400 kgs of cement. Okay, so this is one compromise we can do. So if you're increasing water, make sure you add a corresponding amount of cement also. So at least the water cement ratio remains constant and the strength does not get affected. Okay, so this is a thing. So lesser water is a problem, mix becomes too harsh. More water, segregation, bleeding happens, space separates, aggregate separates, strength is lost. So water should always be in that ideal limit. That is where it is neither too much or too less. Okay. Next is your mix proportion. So this again, when we do mix design, I'll stress upon this point more. So we make I'll mention one key point now. So whenever we are placing concrete by pumping, yesterday we learned about various methods of transporting concrete, remember? So whenever we're placing concrete by pumping, the codal provision says you can reduce the coarse aggregate content by 10%. Okay. So what does that mean? If I want something to be more workable, more pumpable, I want the percentage of coarse aggregates that is there in my concrete mix to be less. Okay. So in a way, your more is the percentage of fine aggregates, more workable it is going to be. Okay, just keep that in mind. So the ratio in which your coarse aggregate to fine aggregate is present, or the ratio in which your aggregate to cement is present, will affect. More is the paste, or more is the pasty content. When I say pasty content, it's basically all your finer particles, your cement plus water plus sand. More is the paste, more workable it is going to be. So that is why take mortar. In mortar, you don't have coarse aggregate at all. So mortar, even with lesser water cement ratios, are very workable, because as soon as you bring in larger size aggregates into the picture, the mix becomes very harsh because of the larger surface area and they become less workable. Okay. Next is the size and surface texture of aggregate. What I'll do is I'll mix size, surface texture and shape together, and I'll give you an analogy. So if you have aggregates that are round, okay, and smooth, so things that are round and smooth will obviously have smoother surface areas will obviously offer lesser friction. Okay, and since there is lesser friction, there will be lesser bonding between your cement paste and the aggregates. So in a way, round aggregates offer less friction, hence more workability. So that is why a lot of these contractors these days, not these days, I mean always, um, they prefer river sand. Okay, you try talking to a masonry who's been working for a very long time in the construction industry. He does not like M sand at all. He's like, sir, M sand is very bad. No matter how much M sand we use, how much water we add, the mixes are very unworkable. We like river sand only. So how is river sand formed? So river sand is basically formed over a extended period of weathering of rocks in those alluvial plains, and through this entire process where it is flowing upstream from the river side. So over all this millennia, what would have happened is these river particles that are formed would have a very smooth round surface. Okay, and since it is smooth and round, when it was used in concrete, the concrete mix was more workable. So the same amount of river sand, instead of using river sand, if these masonries use M sand is not manufactured, obviously is not formed the same way river sand is formed. M sand is formed using jaw crushers. Okay, stone is broken into tinier fragments and M sand is formed. So obviously the particle shape or size is not going to be round for an M sand. It is going to be rugged. From an engineering point of view, M sand is actually better because I want something that has more undulations on the surface, that is more rough, because the bonding between the cement paste and the aggregate is going to be more. At the same time, the minute you bring in something that is not round or smooth, the workability will get affected. Okay, so you'll have to sort of strike a balance between the different properties of aggregates. And one other thing that is also observed is you have a special type of concrete that is called as self-compacting concrete. Okay, so what happens in self-compacting concrete is it is very flowy. I think next class or some class I'll play a video and I'll show you how self-compacting concrete behaves. You don't need to compact it at all. You simply pour it into wherever it needs to go. It will compact simply by the virtue of its self-weight. Okay, so sometimes the self-compacting concrete is also called a self-consolidating concrete, because it consolidates and reduces the voids that is present simply by virtue of its existence. By its existence, I mean its own self-weight. So in self-compacting concrete, we reduce the maximum nominal size of aggregate. Instead of using larger size aggregates like 20 mm size aggregates or higher, use lesser size aggregates, 6 mm aggregates, 10 mm aggregates. So aggregates are still there. So lesser the size of the aggregates, more is the workability. Okay, just keep this in mind. Did someone comment something? Anyone have any doubts? Sir, I'm a bit confused about workability. What about it, Raghav?
Sir, you were saying for engineering purposes, if we are having a M sand, which is rough in shape, that
Yes.
is good. That gives more strength.
Correct.
But at the same time, you're saying its workability is less. So
correct. So from the strength point of view, use M sand. Okay. In the next chapter, I'll teach you how to increase the workability of concrete without actually increasing the water content. So these days, there is an admixture called as super plasticizer. Okay. So use M sand and use all these admixtures to ensure you don't compromise on the workability. Understood?
yes, sir.
Okay. So for now, from an engineering point of view, M sand that is specifically designed to be used in concrete is definitely better than river sand for a lot of reasons. One, from the ecological point of view, obviously it is less damaging to the environment. Two is because, like I told you, it is because of its shape. Anything that is rough, take I don't know, if you have a shoes or a chappal that has a smooth surface and you're walking on the rough surface, obviously the chances of you skidding is more. Okay, apply the same analogy here. If you have an aggregate that is smooth, it will not bond with the rest of the cement paste. It will simply slip and fall. Okay, so that slipping can be attributed to the increase in workability here. So same logic. So for now, M sand is definitely not workable, but it is better from an engineering point of view. Okay, just before I got interrupted here, I was mentioning something about size of aggregates. Okay, I told you lesser the size of aggregates, more is going to be a workability. So this is, one way of looking at it. Again, you might get confused when I mention the next point. So there is something called as a total effective surface area. Okay. What I mean by total effective surface area is, let me see if I can draw a small sketch. Give me 1 second. Say I have a cube. Okay. And say this cube has a size of 10 mm. What is going to be the overall surface area of this? How many faces does this thing have? It will be 6 into 10 into 10. How much does this come up to? Is this correct? Okay. So I have one huge cube of 10 mm area. So one side will be 10 mm into 10 mm. You have 6 faces. This is going to be the overall surface area of the entire cube. Now what I'll do, I'll break this cube into parts like this. So when I divide it into 4 parts on each face, how many cubes do I get in total? How many smaller cubes do I get in total?
8.
8 cubes, correct? And if I have to calculate the overall surface area of these smaller 8 cubes, what will I get? 8 into 6 faces for each cube into what is the surface area of one of these cubes now? 10. I'm dividing each into 2, so it will be 5 into 5, correct? How much is this? 25, 25, 6, 150, 150 into 8 is how much?
1200.
So, is this correct? So, the entire volume being the same, the entire weight being the same, as soon as I reduce the particle size, my surface area is doubled. Okay. Now, instead of breaking it into 4 parts, had I divided it into 10 parts, the surface area is going to be much, much greater than this thing again. Okay. So, this is one thing you need to keep in mind. If I'm reducing the size of the aggregates that I'm using in concrete, yes, it will become workable by virtue of that smaller size. But since the overall surface area is more, the amount of cement paste that is required to bond everything together will also increase. Understood the point? So when we talk about that self-compacting concrete that I was mentioning, the cement content that goes into this is very high because it needs to cater to the larger effective surface area. So it is, how do I say this? If 80 kgs of aggregates is what I need, okay? And if I'm using 20 mm size aggregates, the overall surface area is going to be less. For the same 80 kgs, instead of using 20 mm, if I use 6 mm aggregates, I might need about 100 kgs of additional cement. Okay, to achieve the same strength. So just keep this in mind. We'll deal with this when we're doing mixed proportioning, but this is one fact you cannot neglect. You cannot simply equate 80 kgs of 20 mm aggregates with 80 kgs of 6 mm aggregates and tell them aggregate is aggregate, because the surface area thing is a huge thing. Ultimately, your CSA gel that is formed around these aggregates is what keeps it together. If you don't have enough cement to hold everything together, it is going to become a problem. Okay, so size and shape of aggregate is done, and like your friend brought up the issue of why should we compromise on workability. Thing called admixtures will come into picture. Okay, there is an entire unit on admixtures in your syllabus. For now, I'll briefly mention what admixtures are. So admixture is anything other than your fine aggregate, coarse aggregate, cement and water. Okay, other than these 4 components, anything else that I add into concrete to improve the property of concrete is called an admixture. Okay, and these admixtures can be of 2 types. They can be called chemical admixtures or mineral admixtures. So mineral admixtures, we've already spoken about a few. Remember fly ash, ground granulated blast furnace slag, silica fume, etc. So these are basically, they will act as replacement for cement. Okay, because they're pozzolanic material, meaning in the presence of cement, and its secondary byproducts, which is your calcium hydroxide. Okay, these things, the silica present in all these pozzolanic materials will react with calcium hydroxide to give secondary CSH gel. Okay, so these are mineral admixtures. Chemical admixtures are those that have nothing to do with hydration by itself, but it helps improve the key properties of concrete. For example, there's something called as accelerator. So if I'm doing underwater concreting, okay, and I can't wait for 10 hours for the concrete to, reach its final setting time, I use something called as an accelerator, which will increase the rate at which the concrete sets and hardens. Okay. Next, I have something called as a retarder. What does a retarder do? I was giving you this example of Kumbalgod and JP Nagar. If the distance between the place where concrete is manufactured and the place where concrete is used is too far, I can use something called as a retarder. So it will delay the setting time. Instead of it setting in initial setting time for 30 minutes, it will get extended to 3 hours, 4 hours. I can use retarders. So this is our key things when we come to workability. We have something called as water reducing agents and superplasticizers. So what these superplasticizers and water reducing agents do is, I'll simply draw a rough sketch. We'll talk about more of this in the future. So you have a lot of cement particles that are sticking to each other. Okay, and these cement particles are very smaller in size. So these things stick to each other mainly due to the presence of static electricity, or because of the charges. Okay, so what these superplasticizers do is, if this cement particle is all positively charged, okay, your superplasticizer is going to be negatively charged. So what it would do is, it would take one positively charged cement particle, it would form a thin film all around it. Okay, and it will take another cement particle, form a thin film around it. Now what will happen, since this entire thing is effectively negatively charged, this is also negatively charged on surface, these things will repel each other. Okay, and since this repulsion happens, these cement particles will not flock together. And since these cement particles are not flocking together, if you can see these gaps between the cement particles, they're filled with water. Okay, this water becomes free water. So you're basically freeing water. This free water will help increase the workability. So this is a very brief idea about what happens in case of use of superplasticizers. But we'll be dealing with this working mechanism, steric hindrance, static electricity, and all that in a little more detail in the next unit. For now, remember, do not worry about workability whilst compromising on the quality and type of aggregates that you want to choose. Okay, choose whatever aggregate you want, choose whatever mineral admixture you want. Workability can be taken care of by using chemical admixtures such as superplasticizers and plasticizers. Clear? These days you have a very new thing called VMA. Okay, VMA stands for viscosity modifying agents. So this is again a fluid which, when added to concrete in a minute amount, will modify the viscosity. Okay, it will increase the shear flow capacity of concrete. So it makes the concrete more flowable. So you have a lot of admixtures. We'll deal with them at a later point. For now, just remember there's something called as admixtures, and they affect workability. Next. Yeah, the last factor affecting workability is your weather condition. Like I told you, in hot weather concreting, where the evaporation losses is more, the water gets lost, and once the water gets lost, your mix becomes less workable. At the same time, in cold weather concreting, the also workability reduces, but for the other reason, your water will freeze, and since the water freezes, it is not freely available to act as a lubricant between the rest of the cement and concrete matrix. So workability is lost again. So very briefly, these are the various factors that affect the workability of concrete. You can go through them, point-wise when I share the slides, or go through the textbook. Okay, I think we'll stop here. The tests on workability, I'll do it in the next class. What I'll do is I'll play a video first, and I'll show you how the test is done, and then I'll explain why we're doing what we're doing. So in your laboratory, you have slump test, you have compaction factor test, you have VB test, you have. So in the lab, you'll have these three tests. So you can also go through your lab manual to look at the procedure for these 3 tests. Okay, flow test you have, but the flow test that we do in our lab is only for mortar. Okay, the same apparatus but slightly bigger in size can also be used to find out workability of concrete. So to give a very brief idea about how we measure workability, each of these 3 things, the 3 tests we do, is a different measure. Okay, in slump test, we measure the deflection of concrete. It can collapse under its own self weight. So this is measured in mm. Okay, in compaction factor, we obtain a ratio of concrete under partially compacted condition to concrete under fully compacted condition. So your compaction factor is basically a unitless entity. It is simply a ratio of something by something. One second. And the last thing is your VB time. Okay, what happens in VB test is we measure time in seconds. Okay, so this is the VB apparatus. We fill concrete into this, cone. We lift it up, and then we switch on this vibrating table of a machine. So we measure the time that is taken by concrete to fill this rectangular container. Okay, so 3 different things we're measuring, and these 3 tests cannot all be used for all types of concrete. So I'll also tell you which test is more suitable for what type of concrete.